Hello, I'm James Macquarie, one of the founders at GLAD. This is our Breaking Down Climate Pollution podcast, in which we ask AI to generate a deep dive conversation based on climate science or policy documents we'd like to learn more about. In this episode, we ask the AI to take a deep dive into the European Union's Methane Action Plan, exploring how this plan to reduce methane emissions across the EU builds on a successful track record of a 36% reduction since 1990. Let's dive in.
Ever take a moment and think about, what even happens to all the garbage we throw out? Or, what's going on in the stomachs of all those cows just munching grass out in the fields?
Yeah.
You might be surprised to learn they've got a surprising connection to the future of our planet.
Okay.
Methane.
Right?
It's a greenhouse gas. We all know about that.
Yeah.
But it's honestly causing quite a stir in the climate change conversation these days.
It is.
We're talking way more potent than carbon dioxide here and even messing with our ozone layer.
Yeah.
But there's good news. The European Union is stepping up to try to tackle these emissions head on with a new plan they put out.
Right.
It's called the EU Methane Action Plan.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today. So to help break this down, we've got with us an expert in all things methane.
Well, thank you.
So this EU Methane Action Plan,
Right.
It's a big deal, right?
It is. Yeah, that lays out this whole strategy to try to significantly reduce methane emissions across the entire EU.
Okay, so it's not their first rodeo, though, right?
No, it's not.
They've been working on this for a while now, haven't they?
They have, and that's actually what makes this so interesting.
Okay.
Because since 1990, the EU has already managed to cut methane emissions by 36%.
Wow. So,
Impressive.
yeah, they're not starting from scratch.
Right.
They've got a really solid track record, and now they're just kind of taking it even further.
36%, though.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, what did they even do to achieve that? And can those lessons be applied here?
But I guess before we get ahead of ourselves, let's break down where all this methane is even coming from in the first place.
Yeah.
Because it's not just cows and landfills, right?
No, it's not.
It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, it's easy to simplify it like that. Yeah. But really, the EU's methane emissions are mainly coming from three key sectors.
Okay.
Agriculture.
Okay.
Waste management.
Yeah.
And energy.
Okay, so those are the three big ones.
Yeah, each with their own unique challenges.
Okay, so let's unpack those then.
Yeah.
Starting with the one that I think we've all secretly been blaming.
Right.
Agriculture.
Yeah.
Just how much are those cow burps really contributing to the problem?
Well, it might sound funny.
Yeah.
But those burps, along with manure management, are responsible for over 50% of the EU's methane emissions. So agriculture is the front runner here.
Okay.
And it's proving to be a really tough nut to crack.
Really?
Because reducing emissions from this sector is very complex.
Okay.
It's costly, and it requires a really fundamental shift in how we approach farming.
So it's not just about telling the cows to hold it in?
No, it's got to be changing farming practices on a fundamental level.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a big challenge.
Speaking of challenges, let's move on to the waste management sector.
Okay.
Where does all of our garbage fit into this methane puzzle?
So landfills are the main culprit here.
Okay.
As waste decomposes, it releases methane.
Makes sense.
So, and the EU has made some good progress by reducing landfill waste through legislation.
Okay.
But there's still work to be done.
Right.
Especially when it comes to food waste.
Yeah.
It's a huge contributor that often gets overlooked.
Food waste.
Yeah.
It's amazing how even something as mundane as our garbage plays a role in this complex issue.
It all ties in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered burping cows.
Right.
And our garbage.
Right.
What about the energy sector?
Okay.
Where does energy fit into this whole methane equation?
So the energy sector's methane emissions are largely tied to something you alluded to earlier.
Okay.
Leaks.
Right.
So think leaky oil and gas infrastructure.
Right.
Pipelines, wells, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
It's like having a leaky faucet releasing methane right into the atmosphere.
Wow.
Now, the good news is that the EU's shift towards renewables is helping, but they'll need stricter regulations to really plug those leaks for real progress to be made.
Leaky gas pipelines, methane-filled landfills, burping cows.
A lot.
It paints quite a picture.
It does.
It sounds like the EU has quite a challenge ahead.
They do.
Especially with, like you said, agriculture being such a tough nut to crack.
Right.
So how are they going to tackle this?
Right.
What's their game plan to reduce methane emissions across these three massive sectors?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
We can delve into the specifics of the EU's Methane Action Plan.
All right, let's dive in. All right, so we've laid out the challenge here.
Yeah.
Methane emissions from agriculture, waste management, and energy.
Mm-hmm.
But talk is cheap, right?
Right.
What's the EU actually going to do about it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Their plan has to be more than just words on paper.
Absolutely. And it's here where the EU Methane Action Plan kind of gets down to brass tacks.
Okay.
It's a multi-pronged approach with tailored strategies for each of the sectors that we talked about.
Okay, so no one-size-fits-all solution.
No.
I like it.
Yeah.
Where do they start?
Well, let's tackle agriculture first.
Okay.
Since it's the biggest methane contributor, as we discussed.
Right.
Their main tool here is something called the Common Agricultural Policy.
Okay.
Or CCAP.
CCAP.
Yeah.
Got it.
Which you can kind of think of as a toolkit for encouraging sustainable farming practices across the EU.
So what's in this toolkit?
Right. What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Well, the CKP uses a combination of carrots and sticks to encourage these practices.
I like.
So the carrots are financial incentives and support for farmers who adopt these more climate-friendly practices.
Okay.
So, for example, they might get funding for new technologies that can manage manure more effectively.
Right.
Or even support for breeding livestock that naturally produce less methane.
Climate-conscious cows now, that's thinking outside the box.
Exactly.
What about the sticks you mentioned?
Right. So along with the financial incentives, the CAP also sets certain environmental standards that farmers need to meet.
Okay.
So this is where regulations come in, ensuring that everybody is pulling their weight.
Got it.
When it comes to reducing their environmental impact.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
Exactly.
To encourage this change.
Yeah.
Make it easier for farmers to adopt better practices, but also set standards.
Right.
To make sure that everyone's on board.
Exactly.
Smart.
Yeah.
But what about those big industrial farms?
Right.
Are they held to a higher standard?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, for large-scale farms and industrial facilities, the EU is kind of flexing its regulatory muscle with the Industrial Emissions Directive.
Okay.
This directive sets strict limits on methane emissions for these bigger players.
Got it.
So essentially, it puts a cap on how much methane they can release.
Less methane escaping from factories and farms. That's a good start.
Right.
But let's not forget about the mountains of garbage we produce.
No, of course.
How is the EU planning on tackling those leaky landfills we talked about?
So that's where their waste management laws come into play.
Okay.
They're really aiming to reduce food waste at its source, which not only tackles methane emissions, but also just makes sense from a resource management perspective.
It's like killing two birds with one stone.
Yeah.
Less waste, less methane.
Exactly.
So are they just going to tell people to eat their broccoli?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
The EU is promoting initiatives like composting, improving food labeling, to reduce confusion about like expiration dates, and encouraging supermarkets to donate unsold food to charities.
Okay.
So trying to kind of shift our entire approach to food waste.
Okay, so they're tackling food waste from multiple angles.
They are.
What about the landfills themselves?
Sure.
Are they getting any kind of makeover?
They are. The EU is investing in technologies to actually capture landfill gas.
Wow.
Which is primarily methane.
Okay.
And use it for energy production.
Oh, wow. So instead of just letting it escape into the atmosphere, they're finding ways to put it to good use.
Exactly. Turning trash into treasure.
I like it.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered agriculture.
Right.
Waste management.
Uh-huh.
What about the energy sector?
Okay.
It seemed like fixing those leaky pipelines was kind of low-hanging fruit.
Right.
Is the EU taking advantage of that?
Absolutely. They're implementing much stricter regulations on oil and gas operations.
Okay.
Requiring companies to be way more proactive about detecting and repairing leaks.
So no more turning a blind eye.
Exactly.
To those methane leaks.
And the EU is also using technology to their advantage here.
Okay.
They're investing in satellite and aerial monitoring systems to keep a closer eye on these operations.
Wow.
And identify leaks more effectively.
Satellites hunting methane leaks sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does a little bit.
But in this case, it's a good thing.
It is.
Huh?
Yeah, it adds a whole new level of accountability for the energy industry.
It's like having a methane watchdog in orbit.
Exactly.
Okay, so I've got the big picture stuff with the national inventories. We've got the high-tech monitoring for the energy sector.
Right.
What about agriculture?
Yeah.
How do you track methane emissions from something as vast and decentralized as farming across the entire EU?
That's a good question, and that's where the Common Agricultural Policy, or CAP, comes back into play.
Okay.
So remember how we talked about it being like a toolkit for sustainable farming?
Right.
Well, those tools come with a built-in tracking system.
Right.
The CPK includes specific indicators and metrics for measuring the environmental impact.
Got it.
Of these various farming practices.
So it's not just about giving farmers incentives.
Right.
It's also about tracking whether those incentives are actually translating into reduced methane emissions.
Exactly.
Happy.
The EU will be analyzing data on things like fertilizer use, manure management, livestock feed.
Got it.
To assess the effectiveness of their agricultural policies in reducing methane emissions.
It's like holding a magnifying glass to the agricultural sector.
Yeah.
Really tracking the impact of these changes on the ground.
Yeah. And this is all part of that monitoring
and
reporting that we were just talking about.
It sounds like the EU is very serious about this.
They seem to be.
About keeping score and making sure that their plan actually delivers.
Right. It's one thing to have it on paper.
Right.
It's another thing to actually make sure it's happening.
But here's something that's been on my mind.
Yeah.
This entire plan focuses on policy changes,
right?
Regulations, industry overhauls. What about the human element?
That's a good point.
Where do individuals like you and me fit into this methane reduction mission?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And frankly, one that I think the report could address more directly.
Okay.
You know, while the EU's plan kind of sets the stage for these top-down changes, individual actions shouldn't be underestimated.
Okay.
Imagine if everyone in the EU made a conscious effort to reduce their meat consumption, compost their food waste, choose renewable energy sources whenever possible.
Yeah, it's like the EU is building the framework.
Right.
But it's up to each of us to fill in the gaps.
Exactly.
With our own actions.
Yeah, individual choices can have a ripple effect.
Right.
By making more sustainable choices in our daily lives.
Yeah.
We contribute to a larger shift in consumer demand.
Makes sense.
Which can further incentivize industries to adopt greener practices.
Right. It's like a cycle.
It becomes this powerful cycle of positive change.
So it's not just about what the EU does, it's about what we do.
Exactly.
We have a role to play.
We do.
In this methane reduction mission.
Absolutely.
Through the choices we make every single day.
Every single day.
This is a collective effort on a global scale.
It is. And it's a good reminder that even small changes can have a big impact when we all work together.
All right, so we've talked about this EU plan to try to tackle methane emissions.
Right.
But plans are just plans, right?
Yeah.
How will we actually measure their success?
Right. It's like you're setting out on a road trip.
Right.
You've got your map, but you need a way to track your mileage.
Right.
And make sure you're going in the right direction.
Exactly.
So that's why the EU Methane Action Plan includes this really robust system for monitoring and reporting on their methane emissions.
So what does that look like?
Yeah.
Are we talking about like methane trackers on every cow in landfill?
Not quite, although that would be pretty cool.
Right.
One key component is the greenhouse gas inventories that each country submits annually to the UN.
Okay, so every year.
Yeah, these inventories provide this comprehensive picture of a country's emissions, including methane across all sectors.
So it's like an annual report card.
Exactly.
For methane reduction.
Yeah, and these reports are really essential for tracking the overall progress towards the EU's reduction targets.
Okay.
And for figuring out where additional effort is needed.
So transparency is key.
Exactly.
But those national inventories only give us like a bird's eye view, right?
They do.
How do they ensure accuracy like on the ground?
Right.
And crack down on those methane leaks that we talked about, especially in the energy sector?
So you're right, national data is really important.
Yeah.
But the EU is kind of going a step further.
Okay.
They're establishing stricter monitoring and reporting standards specifically for the energy sector.
Okay, so like special rules.
Yeah, this means more frequent leak detection and repair requirements.
Makes sense.
For oil and gas companies.
Okay.
As well as investing in more advanced technologies.
Right.
Like satellite monitoring that we were talking about.
Satellites hunting methane leaks. That's so cool.
It is really cool.
But, I mean, in this case, it's a good thing, right?
It's a very good thing
Right.
because these technologies can detect methane leaks with incredible precision.
Wow.
Even from space.
Real.
So it makes it much harder for those emissions to go unnoticed.
That's awesome.
Right. It adds a whole new level of accountability
to
the energy industry.
So it's like having a methane watchdog.
Exactly.
In orbit.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay, so we've got the big picture stuff with the national inventories.
Right.
The high-tech monitoring for the energy sector.
Right.
What about agriculture?
Yeah, agriculture is tough.
Right, because it's so, vast and decentralized.
Right. How do you track methane emissions from farming practices?
Right.
Across the entire EU?
It's a good question.
It is a really good question, and that's where the Common Agricultural Policy,
okay,
or CAP, comes back into play.
Okay, right.
Remember we were talking about how it's like a toolkit
Yes.
for sustainable farming?
Right.
Well, those tools come with a built-in tracking system.
Oh, okay.
The CAP includes these really specific indicators and metrics for measuring the environmental impact of different farming practices.
So it's not just about giving farmers those incentives to make those changes.
Right.
It's about tracking whether those incentives are actually leading to reduced methane emissions.
Exactly.
Got it.
The EU will be analyzing data on things like fertilizer use, manure management, livestock feed, all that stuff to assess the effectiveness of their policies.
It's like holding a magnifying glass to the agricultural sector.
Exactly.
Really tracking the impact of these changes on the ground.
And it's all part of that monitoring and reporting.
It sounds like the EU is very serious.
They seem to be.
About keeping score here and making sure that their plan delivers real results.
Yeah, because it's one thing to have it on paper.
Right.
But it's a whole other thing to actually make sure it's happening.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because we've laid out the challenge.
Yeah.
We've talked about their plan to tackle it. We've even looked at the ways they're going to measure success.
Right.
But all of this begs a bigger question, doesn't it?
It does.
What can we actually do with this information?
And what's the takeaway?
Yeah.
For the average person?
The EU has a plan. They're taking action.
Right.
They're even tracking their progress.
Yeah.
But the real question is,
what are you going to do?
Yeah, what role will you choose to play?
Exactly.
Because the future of our planet,
right,
and frankly, the air we breathe depends on it.
It really does.
Well, there you have it, everyone. That's our deep dive into the EU Methane Action Plan.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep asking those important questions.